Good evening.
Good evening, Howard.
There you go. Or as you say, Erev Tov. Friends, welcome to Temple Habonim. We are so very, very pleased that you are here. I'm Rabbi Howard Voss Altman. I'm the rabbi of Temple Habonim. To my left, and always to my left, is Dale Azevedo, who is the Reverend Doctor. You know, people should just start calling me Rabbi Doctor these days, I think. I just received a Doctor of Divinity, so there you go. No, don't do that, please. Okay. Yes, it is indeed. That's right. So welcome, and we're very, very glad that you came out tonight. I want to just do a little housekeeping. Trinky, if you could raise your hand, that'd be great. Trinky Bruckner, who is our host as well, our co-host, who's the leader of along with David Mello, the Barrington Interfaith Partners. A convener. Okay, she's a convener. Not the case for Jews. Don't convene. We don't have convene. But if you should have to use the washroom, they are back through the social hall and to the right, and you'll see signs. If you should need to leave for any reason, you can go out this way. There's an exit sign there, or to go out a more conventional way, which is through the social hall and to the left. If, for any reason, you are not hearing the sound of my voice or the Reverend Dale's voice, just raise your hand and let us know. There is no reason that anyone should be here and not hearing us if we can help you hear. And that may mean speaking up, or that may mean getting better sound for you. But we want that to happen. If you have any questions or concerns at all, we have my friend David is around always. I want to say thank you to David. He's right back there. If you want to say hello, wave to David. And David set up all the sound and all the technology. David is just like an amazing person who does all kinds of things for Temple Habonim, including being our educator and our music person. And also, Bob and Lois are out there somewhere. They're greeting. Yeah. So again, if you have any concerns about the physical space or that you need to know anywhere, Bob and Lois, who are at the door who greeted you, can also be helpful. All right? Great. I think that's all of my housekeeping. Welcome, be comfortable, and we're so glad that you joined us. I want to introduce now the convener of Barrington Interfaith Partners, Trinky Bruckner.
Thank you.
There's another microphone over there. That's right.
Yes, Barrington.
I believe it's on.
Barrington Interfaith Partners.
You're straight.
I have a very soft, shaky voice anyway, so I need my microphone. Barrington Interfaith Partners doesn't have a leader. We are consensus, congenial, and everyone is welcome to join and work with us. So, Barrington Interfaith Partners was founded in 2016 and has been building relationships and pathways to justice since then. We are a group of lay people and clergy from several Rhode Island communities and houses of worship, and we represent different faiths and beliefs. We work together to educate ourselves and our communities about topics related to faith and justice, and to bring about a just and peaceful society. We meet once a month, and we're always interested in welcoming new people. We plan to hold another forum in the spring, topic to be determined. So Rabbi Howard will speak first about Project 2025. Then Reverend Dale will speak about Christian nationalism. There will then be an opportunity for questions and discussions at any time. Help yourself to refreshments. And sign our email list if you would like. Before we begin, I offer a prayer from the prophet Amos. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Let us all join together and say, Amen.
Trinky, thank you so much. I am guessing that most of you are very, very, very concerned, not just about Project 2025, but generally speaking, we're going to be voting in 50-something days? Less than that. Okay. And I think that the goal for this evening will be not just for you to learn about Project 25 or its impact on the rise of Christian nationalism, but also to make sure that you are communicating with your friends and family, loved ones, neighbors, co-workers, colleagues, and anyone whose path you cross to tell them about what you learned this evening. This doesn't end here. In fact, this is just the beginning of our civic and I would say even constitutional obligations to speak out with the people that we know. If you know people who you feel are not going to hear what you're saying, let that be. If you're going to talk with people, though, who are moderate on the fence, or maybe just lukewarm, then go ahead. Ask them questions about what they know about Project 2025, and if what you learned today is helpful, then you can talk to them about that. So that's my elevator speech to begin. But in terms of this actual, let us say, proposal, the only analogy that I can come even remotely close to are the Nuremberg laws of 1935. Now, those were laws that were put into place, and these are just proposals. But my feeling about it always is, if someone tells you what they want to do, and tells you even before they're ready to implement it, you should believe them. This document, Project 2025, is 865 pages. Now, one of the reasons why it's so long is because they know people won't read it. But there are clever people out there who have, and who have helped us by summarizing, explaining, boiling it down to its essentials. And so that's what this PowerPoint helps us do. And an article that I have here by Rabbi Jay Michelson, who is a tremendously important leftist Jewish rabbi who writes regularly for the Forward and other publications. And what Michelson has communicated over these past few months is that we can't say we didn't know what was going to happen. We can't just hide from the fact that all of this is out in the public eye, available to anyone who seeks it. These are plans that are going to be in place, drafted by many, many, many people in former President Trump's White House. And so when he stands on television and disavows it or says he knows nothing about it, this is yet another falsehood. He knows everything about this, or as much as he is able to know. So The reason for this is very clear. The very ultra-conservative right did not have their act together when, in 2016, Trump surprised the world by being elected. They weren't about to take that chance. And so they created this as a blueprint for governance for the future. And I think that's why we, as educated voters, have an obligation to know what they have created and to talk about it. I would not want you to exaggerate. I would not want you to gild the lily. But indeed, I would like you to speak about it honestly, which is what we'll do here tonight. So, we see here on the big screen, Project 2025 goals, and you see the 8, which are every single one is more disturbing than the next. But I will say to you that the real foundation of these 8 goals begins with the undoing of the separation of church and state. There is nothing more foundational to our nation's identity and to our ability to accept the views of minorities and minority religions than the separation of church and state. The undoing of this is with the intent, and Dale will speak about this extensively in his remarks, is to enable the United States to formally become a Christian nation. By the way, did anyone note who, during the debate, former President Trump said in his remarks as a character witness or ally of his? Who would that be? Orban, Viktor Orban, right? Who publicly states that what he has established in Hungary is a Christian nationalist state. So when Trump says, I know nothing about Project 2025 or any of the goals, the fact that he would cite Viktor Orban as a character witness, which was frightening enough, is an indication of his either admiration or his identification with one who identifies himself publicly as a Christian nationalist, someone who is invited and feted at various Republican conferences, including the Conservative Political Action Conference that Orban was the keynote speaker of this past year. So, we see this in the taking away, dismantling of reproductive rights. Okay. When we say take away reproductive rights, it isn't just going back to the states and seeing what happens there. It is about setting up a registry so that every abortion, miscarriage, visit to a gynecologist, purchasing of contraceptives becomes documented into a central agency. And if a person in a state that's banned abortion goes to another state where there is, for example, Rhode Island and Massachusetts, that's documented as well. And all the clinics that do this work are documented as well. So that it isn't just, of course, an end to reproductive rights. It's also literally a precursor to Margaret Atwood's book, The Handmaid's Tale. And I don't say that with any hyperbole. That is exactly what they want. It won't just stop at abortion. It will be contraception. It will be IVF. It will be complete control over a woman's body. Why? Because these are radical, anti-democratic, misogynist, anti-women people who want to basically send women back to a time when their bodies are not their own. The end programs that address climate change. Okay, so wait, I just want to read to you, because it's just so remarkable, what it actually says in Project 2025. Not just to tell you about climate change, but I have to actually be able to turn pages. Here we go. All right, so it says, the document 2025 says, quote, "It is not a political cause, but a pseudo-religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue." That's what the document says. So that it's not seen as a threat to fossil fuel companies or climate change is not seen as a threat to the planet. That's not really what's on their minds. It's that liberal people have embraced climate change as a way to undermine, I don't know, American business, capitalism, whatever it may be. But their vindictiveness is only outweighed or outdone by their own lack of concern for our climate. So undoing any environmental legislation, undoing any clean water, undoing the EPA entirely is all a part of Project 2025. Ending public education, once again returning to the separation of church and state. Why? Why upend public education? Well, actually, a couple of reasons. First, public education has teacher unions. Teacher unions run by and large by American liberal Jews. You'll notice that J.D. Vance publicly attacked the leader of the National Education Association, Randy Weingarten. Why do that? Because public education is a place where people learn, where young people learn about civics. Young people learn about American history. Young people learn about all kinds of things that disturb these people from Project 2025. And upending public education, though, also fits into a narrative of your taxpayer dollars going to Christian schools so that parents, essentially white Christian parents, can send their kids to white Christian schools and have everyone pay for them. So you upend both any kind of civic commonality in what kids are learning, but you also upend an agenda of a non-sectarian public school system. Persecuting LGBTQ. I don't have to remind you that our Supreme Court, as it's currently constituted, would never have passed marriage equality. And that Clarence Thomas, and I'm sure his partner in crime, Justice Alito, would just as soon have that happen again, that they would reverse. The right to privacy, generally speaking, is not something that they recognize, and so certainly the right to marriage, a marriage partner of your choice would also not be within their understanding. Even more than that, our transgender community is seen as vulnerable. And for whatever reason, and I think it would take much, much longer than we have, the attack on the vulnerable, on the most vulnerable people, seem to be a very important quality of this agenda. And again, it could not be more disturbing that these people would identify those who are subject to more violence, more suicide, more mental health issues than virtually any other population and say, let's get them. But that is what's happened. Encouraging racism, well, again, undoing DEI takes up I don't know, dozens and dozens of pages of Project 2025, DEI seems to be, again, another easy target for them to take those who are more vulnerable in terms of education, in terms of job opportunities, in terms of housing, and just says, let's throw it out. Let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, because any protection for any minority group would be obviously unfair to white people. So we definitely encourage racism by ending DEI, by ending, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's a movement on college campuses. It's a movement in public housing and also in jobs, public jobs, that is, and corporations have adopted it too, to try to have a more diverse workforce, which would be anathema to these people. Mass deportation and reduced immigration. Again, where do concentration camps come from? The idea of placing the vulnerable outside the vision of most people. So how many illegal immigrants at least are estimated to be here? 11 million. 11 million people. Those 11 million people, day one, mass deportation. I'm not even sure. And during the debate, the moderators asked about that, about what kind of surveillance state would be necessary. Would you be going door to door? How would this work? And of course, there was nothing offered. But that is the proposal. But until that time happens, the plan is to set up concentration camps within our nation, and to take those citizens off the street, those people off the street, and say, you will now be subject to our incarceration. So that's 11 million people in camps set up specifically to do this. I'm gonna not talk about mainstream Christian nationalist ideology, because I'm gonna leave that to you, Dale. And then giving unchecked power to the president. Well, all of us have been paying attention to the last Supreme Court decision that was authored by Chief Justice Roberts. I recommend the long article in the Sunday Times this past Sunday, talking about Justice Roberts and his intervention in the authorship of presidential immunity. And when you are thinking about unchecked power, I would recommend you going back to President Nixon's interview with David Frost, which I believe was in 1977, when he said, in what was the most revealing moment of those interviews, when the president does something, it's legal because the president did it. And that is now, that radical view, which enabled him to think that he should never have been either proposed prosecution for his crimes against the Constitution, has now actually been written into law. So today, if a president is acting as part of being president, he cannot or she cannot commit a crime. Anything done is immune. And so, actually, you know what? Hang on one second. I might have this on a slide. I think I do. Yes, there it is. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. So, Justice Sotomayor wrote this as the dissent in in Trump versus United States. So we don't have to actually wonder about Project 2025's goal of doing this. It's already been done by the Supreme Court. So that's a goal already accomplished. But the others, at least not so far anyway, have not succeeded, at least not to the extent that they would like it to. But with the Supreme Court in place, there will not be a backstop. There will not be a backstop. There will not be a guardrail. It will be whatever it is they want it to be. Because the Supreme Court is not going to challenge this power. So, I have one more thing that needs to be said, and that is the eradication of the administrative state. This is often referred to now these days by people on the right as the deep state. What it in actuality is are people with education, expertise, and experience in the field that they study. So, for example, there is a division in NASA, not surprisingly, that studies climate change and the impact of human activities on the climate. And you have climate scientists at NASA who do this work. That will be gone. There will not be anything like that. Because people with expertise will no longer be welcomed in the federal government. And just so that you know, there are today anyway about 20,000 people on the list of appropriate loyalists for federal government jobs, regardless of expertise. They are culled from their various groups. And they will be replacing those who have dedicated their life to science or health or education. Yeah. And they'll simply be gone. And the only qualification those people will have is that they will be loyal to the administration. That's the only thing only qualification they will need. By the way, it's not just a plan for 20,000. That's just the list that they have so far. The plan is 50,000. Not to mention the end of the Justice Department as an independent agency, the end of the Department of Education, the end of the Department of Commerce, the end of the Department of Environmental Protection, the end of the USDA as well, the Department of Agriculture. All those will be gone. Civil service will literally be a shadow of what it was. Again, these are not sort of just people who are writing on the internet. This is the blueprint for governance. They have published what they want to do. It's now up to us to say, that's not the vision for the United States that we have, and to publicize it to loved ones, friends, family, and anyone else you believe is interested. So thank you.
I don't know if this one. All right, this one's a lot quieter. Can people hear me? Can you? I'm going to switch up. Yeah, just use this. I'm going to use this one because it's much louder. Okay. Thank you, Howard. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about Christian nationalism and the role that it, not so much the role that it has played in the past, but the evolution from what was 20, 30 years ago considered an extremist position, how it has become more mainstream in the more recent decades, the last 30 years, really, since I entered the ministry. I have seen the evolution of Christian nationalism moving from fringes into what is now, in many ways, mainstream American politics. So I'd like to just start off by talking about what Christian nationalism is. because I know when I started looking into it, I needed a definition. So I'm going to start off by saying everything that I have researched and everything that I've looked into begins by saying there is no clear definition of what nationalism is. There are differing opinions within a set scope, I'll say. So there's not a clear definition. It's a little bit more vague than that, but there are some understandings of what we have. And I'm going to start talking about nationalism and then shift into Christian nationalism, because nationalism is actually something that we've been witnessing and seeing globally on the rise in recent decades. Christian nationalism, when I get to that, is a particularly American brand of nationalism, at least as far as the way it's impacting us in our country at this time. I do want to start off by saying nationalism is not patriotism. I want to start off with that. Nationalism and patriotism are two totally different things. Patriotism is a love of one's country and what it stands for, and celebrating that. That's my definition of patriotism. I think it's a pretty accurate definition. So patriotism is, as I'm going to define it, a love of country and a celebration of all that is good and positive about the country in which you live. Patriotism is generally considered a positive, and has historically been considered a positive. Nationalism, in contrast, is understanding that people can be defined through the common culture or morals from the nation in which they come from. So the idea is that inherently an American is notably different from a Russian or an Iranian or an Australian or a Colombian, because we are brought up in a moral climate and a culture that is unique to the area in which we grow up. That we have common ideals that we share that separate us from other nations and other people. On the surface, that doesn't sound so bad. In fact, it also sounds relatively realistic. We are impacted and influenced by the culture in which we grow up. Nationalism, though, as we begin to believe that we can identify people or understand people primarily based upon their nationality, and therefore have assumptions about their morals and their cultures, or believing that their morals and cultures are defined by their national existence, we begin to see some challenges and some issues that arise from that. One of them is it automatically begins to separate or develop an us versus them understanding of the world. We are what we are, they are different. It also begins to lend itself by default of human nature to begin to see for many that what I am is therefore better than what someone else is. We know it as Americans. The common American ethos is that we are the greatest nation in the world, and that every other nation has less to offer than we do. I would argue that's debatable. And certainly people in other nations certainly feel that that's debatable. But that is a common understanding of many Americans. And that is a product of just living within an understanding of nationalism, is that people are easily identified by the various nations in which they come from. Their morals and their values can be understood through the common experiences of those various nations, and therefore we are separate. It also then begins to lean toward, and we need to protect ourselves from the other. Because if we are unique, and being an American or a Canadian or anyone is unique, then if we allow the outsider in, we will lose our identity. We will no longer be unique. We will no longer be American if we allow too many of the others into our space. That which makes us unique will be lost. That's all a part of nationalism in general. Another issue with nationalism that really begins to be a problem is who defines who is in and who is out? Who defines what is the common culture that we as Americans share? Who defines what are the common values that we as Americans share? If we believe that we as a country and as Americans are defined by a common set of values, who determines which values are included and which values are excluded? And by extension, which people are included and which people are excluded? And so those are some of the challenges just that nationalism in and of itself presents as we begin to look at it as a philosophy or as an understanding of humankind. Christian nationalism Christian nationalism is a particular brand of nationalism, a particular understanding of nationalism that defines those common morals and those common values that define us as Americans through the lens of Christianity. So it begins and ends with the understanding that we are a Christian nation and have always been a Christian nation, and that is what sets us apart as unique in the world. And that our values and our morals are inherently defined by our Christian historical nature. We can begin to see, maybe not even begin, we can see how that can potentially be an issue. It is absolutely an issue for those who are non-Christian. It is also an issue for Christians as we begin to ask, whose Christianity are we talking about when we're talking about that as the basis of understanding what it means to be an American? So when we say, or when the head of education in Oklahoma says that the Bible must be taught in public schools, the question is, who's teaching the Bible and what are they teaching about it? And that's assuming that we're talking about even a Christian population, which we're not. We're talking about an interreligious and non-religious population, which is being instructed on the Bible. And the question is, by who? Because I would argue, without question, that they do not want me teaching their children about the Bible. Because my understanding of Scripture and my understanding of the Bible is inconsistent with how they define their interpretation and their understanding of the Bible. So in the same way, I would not want them teaching my children who God is and how to live our faith. They absolutely would not want me in their schools teaching their children about who God is and how we can live our faith. Again, that's strictly looking at it as if from a Christian internal perspective, let alone looking at the fact that in the reality, we as a nation are more than just a Christian population, but we are an interfaith population and a large population of no faith as well as a part of what it means to be America. Okay, so the question was, is the Catholic Church separate or is it a part of the Christian tradition? And so the somewhat depends who you ask, actually. The vast majority of Christians will absolutely say, yes, Catholics are a part of the Christian tradition. It is fascinating that I have some relatives from the Deep South who will actually say, no, they aren't Christian, which is bizarre. It makes no sense, because they absolutely are. We can get into debates about some of the others, Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, some of that, but Catholics basically are 100% consistent with the general Christian traditions and beliefs, let alone, they would argue, they are the original Christian faith. So,
can I just add one thing? What's interesting about the question, Roseanne, is that we see within the authorship of Project 2025, and also we see this on the Supreme Court, where 7 of the justices are Catholic. We also see this in, and I don't know if you've been following this, but the vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, has converted to Catholicism, and it's not surprising how and who have been his influences in making the decision. So there's a very, I think, radical Catholic strain right now going on. So that's also a part of these things too. Okay.
So I just want to, I guess, make another point or two. One thing that I think is really important, and I'd say this at the beginning, which I didn't, but I think it's just as core as saying nationalism and patriotism are entirely separate things. It's also important to acknowledge that when we talk about Christian nationalism, and when I criticize Christian nationalism as being, and I'd go this far, as being anti-American, and I can get into that a little bit more, it's certainly, in my opinion, what's that big document that we have? The Constitution, that's it. Big document. It's important. And I would argue that Christian nationalism is fully in opposition to key parts of the Constitution of the United States, which is why I'm concerned about it. But what I want to be clear is being critical of Christian nationalism is also not saying you cannot bring your faith into the voting booth, okay? You saw the stickers that were outside on the table that said, vote, did it say vote your faith? What? Our faith, our vote. Our faith, our vote. And I have often preached, and I will continue to say, that it is essential for us to bring our faith with us into the ballot box or into the voting booth, because if our faith is not so important to us as to help influence our decisions, then I would argue as a faith leader, then there is no point and no value to our faith. So it is essential that we bring it forward. Christian nationalism is not just talking about voting your faith or allowing your faith to influence what you believe and how you believe it. Christian nationalism goes a step further and says not only should you bring your faith to the ballot box, but we then need to codify that faith in law. Okay? So Christian nationalism, by defining the American existence as a Christian experience, as a predominantly Christian reality, is looking to establish the Christian faith in laws, either in setting up moral codes or values that are consistent with one particular understanding of faith, or by going so far as to actually making Christianity the national faith in the United States. And I just want to share a little bit, because as I said at the beginning, this was considered extremist views back 30, 40 years ago. And it was reserved to white supremacists and kind of national marches and things that were considered outside the mainstream. And in recent years, certainly in recent decades, it has become much more mainstream. And I just want to lift up a few examples of that, of where we're seeing Christian nationalism kind of being accepted. And I guess I'll start with just a couple of quotes I'd like to lift up, because it's no longer just extremists. So, for instance, 2 examples of our current lawmakers. So Josh Hawley from Missouri and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we know Marjorie probably pretty well. Josh, I didn't know nearly as well, is not nearly as public. But both of them in recent years have come out more than once, stating very clearly that the United States is a Christian nation, that we should stop pretending otherwise, and that conservatives, and this is their language, conservatives, or as Marjorie Taylor Greene says it, Republicans, should openly embrace the term Christian nationalist to describe themselves. So they have come out on the record on multiple occasions supporting the fact that we are, in fact, without question, a Christian nation, and that we should embrace Christian nationalism as our identity. Slightly more subtle than that, and this gets to what Rabbi Howard was saying about separation of church and state, which really is at the core of Christian nationalism and at the core of Project 2025, because the goals of Project 2025 are deeply influenced by the extreme religious right. And so, an example of something that many people would consider more moderate is our current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who traditionally, I've said this before, traditionally the House is the more extreme of our two legislative bodies, the Senate and the House. The Senate tries to be a little bit more in check and a little bit more reserved. The House is full of wild crazies at times, and that's just been historically, traditionally, where they have that freedom to be a little bit more extreme on both sides. But the Speaker is generally considered to be a relatively moderate position. It holds a lot of power, and it is often used to bring people from both sides, or at least from one side, together to begin to get things done and not necessarily be such an extreme. But here's a quote from Mike Johnson. This quote is from 2016, but he's continued to support this quote and say other things similar to it. It's a common position that he holds. And he says, quote, "Over the last 60 to 70 years, our generation has been convinced that there is a separation of church and state. Most people think it is part of the Constitution. It is not." So he's continuing on, "The founders wanted to protect the church from an encroaching state, but not the other way around." The challenge that I see with that as a Christian is if the church moves into government, it by default establishes a particular understanding of faith in contrast to all other faiths, which is a direct violation of the Establishment Clause or the First Amendment.
Also, note that he is the third in line to assume the presidency. If the president and vice president should somehow not be able to discharge their duties or are injured or incapacitated, the Speaker of the House is the next in line according to the Constitution. And this is the opinion he holds. He's in direct, unassailable power. Okay.
So I think I definitely want to make sure that we have time for questions. But I'll just lift up a couple of things that had struck me in the past year, of kind of the mainstreaming of Christian nationalism, the idea that we are a Christian nation and beginning to codify that in law. So I used the example already of, let's see, what is his name? Well, it's the Oklahoma Director of Education. I mentioned that one earlier, where the Bible must be taught. Again, who's teaching it and what are they teaching about it? Let alone, again, not without respect to people of other faiths in the school system. Louisiana, again, this has been a hot button issue over the years, but when Louisiana governor signed a bill that required the state's public schools, colleges, and universities to display a poster of the Ten Commandments in every single classroom. And the law specifically said, for civic reasons, this is not a religious statement. But you can't take something from a religious document and post it and pretend that it is not religious. And the great questions to ask, at least for me, is I'm guessing they're not pulling it out of the Torah and putting up there, the Hebrew commandments. I'm assuming they are pulling it out of an English translation. And when children of any age ask, what is that? Who's answering that? Whose interpretation of the Ten Commandments are they going to give? Because Christians don't always agree. We don't even number the Ten Commandments the same, let alone interpret them the same. And then you bring in my experience, and Rabbi Howard could potentially speak to this, but my experience in conversations with other rabbis is that Jews and Christians interpret many of the Ten Commandments quite differently. They're understood differently. So if that's being posted and questions are ever going to be asked about it, who's answering that, and which perspective are they going to be sharing and teaching with the children? So that's a question. So that's Louisiana. I mentioned Oklahoma. I've already mentioned the U.S. House of Representatives, and Senator Hawley is a senator, so he's actually from the Senate. A more recent example that troubled me were the attacks on the town DEI commission that occurred this past spring. So Rabbi Howard already spoke that the DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. The town established a formal board and commission on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it came under fire. I'm sure if some of you have read the Barrington Times through the spring, week after week after week, were letters to the editor attacking the town's DEI board and the commission. And the one that bothered me the most was the letter that referred to those on the DEI commission as godless. Not recognizing, despite the fact the author of the letter knows the people on the DEI commission and have had multiple conversations about faith issues, the accusation that they are godless, despite the fact that the president of the DEI Commission is a member of Temple Habonim, and there's currently at least one. Now you know. Now you know. And there's currently at least one ordained Christian minister on the DEI Commission, and historically had been a second as well, founding member of the DEI Commission. Those are the only ones that I know of, and yet the attacks are not on what they're trying to accomplish, but the attacks were that they were godless. And again, the question when we think about Christian nationalism is who gets to determine and define what is godless, what is of God, what is not of God. Whose God are we talking about? When we begin to define what it means to be an American through the lens of one particular faith, we lose what it means to be an American.
I think that, thank you, Dale. That was very, very cogent and well said. I believe, Trinky, you're going to have a microphone, which you have in your hand, and you're going to go, and anyone who has a question, it's a great time to raise it. And you can address it to one or both of us. We'll do our best. Oh, look at that. Yeah, that's good. There you go.
I think so.
Oh, and yeah, stand up and tell us your name.
Tom Bruckner. I'm not a co-convener, though.
Oh.
That's why I got the microphone first.
Okay.
Anyway, Dale, when you were referring to the fact that Catholics might not be considered Christian, in Project 2025, is there an understanding as to who would be considered Christians? Is there a particular denomination of Christian that is apparent that they're going for?
I'll start to answer that, and then I'm going to hand it off to Howard, because Howard has spent a lot more time with the document than I have. of Christian nationalism crosses many different denominational lines, but holds a consistent philosophy or theology of who God is and what it means to live a faithful life and how that should be expressed in American culture and in American life. So it does not lift up one particular denomination or one particular group of Christians, except it echoes or is defined by a very conservative, very traditional understanding of who God is and what it means to be faithful.
I would just add that it's much less important what faith you have as long as you agree with certain principles. And the most important principle is the undoing of the Establishment Clause. In other words, it could be conservative Christians, it could be conservative Muslims, it could be and is included in the coalition Orthodox Jewish faiths, sects, cults, because, why? When the Establishment Clause is undone, there will be millions of dollars flowing into Jewish schools, Jewish day schools. They will educate the ever larger and growing families of Orthodox Jews. So that's a very important part. The critical piece is not what you believe, other than that you believe that the Establishment Clause is preventing us from fulfilling our destiny as a Christian nation. Jews will be for certain second-class citizens in Project 2025, and it even explicitly says that. But Orthodox Jews, because they are faithful to a conservative point of view, will still get all the money they're seeking for their schools. I shudder to think what would happen when imams say, we need a piece of the pie too. See what happens then. God forbid any of that because come to pass, though. So I don't think there's anything other than a common perspective that the Establishment Clause needs to be undone. Other questions?
Excuse me.
Can we stand?
Back.
If you can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. My name is Judith Davis, and that beautiful man over there is the pastor of a church that my husband and I joined just 6 months ago, and we've never been happier in a church. So I want to say that being here tonight really feeds my ecumenical spirit. Just listening to the two of you, knowing you're both from completely different religions. And I have a question for you. What I'm finding is that people, many people, and these are thinking friends of mine, are so exhausted listening to the negative stuff on TV that they are just zeroing in on a few favorite pundits. And I recently had what I thought was going to be a pretty interesting conversation with someone that I thought was gently leading to suggesting they should get an understanding of Project 225. And the answer was, what you keep hearing is, oh, well, he distanced himself from that. I ended up purchasing the booklet that you can get on Amazon and presenting it with him and his family as a gift. But I can't afford to be doing that every day. My question to you is, can we talk about how do we talk to people who might have a listening for it and who don't have the patience to listen to the 50,000, 100,000 foot level description either? Thank you.
We both look at each other. I like that. So I just want to share, acknowledge that one is tricky. just want to be clear. It is very tricky. There are people in my family I will not talk with about it. There's something about being safe. You need me to switch mics? Is this not working as well? Yeah, okay. I want to encourage us as you choose to talk with people about this. There are some people that are going to be more safe to talk to than others. And I just want to acknowledge that's just a reality. And by that, I mean emotionally safe. I'm not saying we're necessarily going to be attacked, heaven forbid. It certainly could happen, but hopefully not with people we know and love. But being emotionally safe. So I think it's important I think you had mentioned, Judith, the idea of, those who may be receptive. And I think that that's important. And I think Rabbi Howard mentioned that earlier in that, we can't talk to everybody about it, but those who may be a little bit more on the fence or a little bit more open to trying to get a deeper understanding. So I want to just acknowledge that. I don't think we can talk to everybody about it, and it would be too exhausting to try to talk to many people about it. And I frankly don't know if there are good resources that you know. I know you've got the letter that Rabbi Michelson wrote, and I've seen that. Are there other documents or other summations that would be helpful?
Yeah. Even smaller than the one I got on Amazon, which was,
Yeah.
You know the one I'm talking about.
I do know the one you're talking about, yes. I would also, if you are subscribers to the New York Times, a columnist named Carlos Lozada, Lozada, Carlos Lozada, wrote a very important piece about Project 2025 in March of 2024 that I would highly recommend. So that's another possibility, another source. But if I were speaking to, as I do, to friends or family or loved ones about this, I would just try to emphasize what the Establishment Clause has meant to the United States of America. And most importantly, that anything that we value in terms of freedom, of identity, of religion, of pluralism, of the right to believe in one thing or something else, all would be in danger if the Establishment Clause was eradicated. So to my mind, the American project, by the way, it's not the American project, pluralism began here. Religious freedom began here. If you have friends in Rhode Island, it's Rhode Island that brought us this. It's Roger Williams that brought us this. So this is calling for an end to Rhode Island's great contribution to the United States, not to mention the fact that pluralism is the foundation upon which everything else is built here. And so as they attempt to end the idea of pluralism, that's a sufficient, I think, and persuasive danger that people ought to know about. Even if they're not, sympathetic on a woman's choice or LGBT marriage or racism or immigration. Perhaps religious freedom itself, which is in danger of coming undone, is the way to go. I want to do one quick anecdote. And the anecdote comes from my time in the land of Israel, where I spent a year, and talking about the United States and about Israel. I don't know whether many of you know this, but I'm just going to say it. In Israel, there's no freedom of religion for Jews. For Jews. So there is one way to be religious in Israel. The only way accepted by the state of Israel is Orthodox Judaism, not conservative, not Reform. And I was talking with an Israeli about this and expressing my unhappiness. They don't acknowledge a wedding. No, I could not officiate at a wedding, for example. Or anyone who gets married in Israel must marry under the Orthodox rabbinate. But that's just a sidelight. So I mentioned to the friend I was talking to that this was, I think, a bone of contention for me. And the answer to me was, well, if you want to change things, Howard, then just convince 100,000 Reformed Jews to move to Israel and they can vote for religious pluralism and that would change it. And I said, well, that's one way to look at it. And I said, but in the United States, for example, there is one group of people who are more responsible for freedom of religion cases than any other single religious group in the United States. What group is that? No, it is not atheist, although that was a good guess. It's actually the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses are the most successful religious minority in bringing cases to the Supreme Court that have won the rights of religious freedom for everyone. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses are a small, largely minority, largely poor, largely black group of worshipers, at least on the East Coast anyway.
Largely black.
Yes.
I did not know that.
I know, it is. And so, a less powerful people you could not imagine. And yet, they are the ones who have brought the greatest change and religious freedom to the United States through the court. That's the answer I have. Pluralism is everything. Absolutely everything. That I can believe in something, and the Reverend Dale can believe in something, and you can believe in nothing, or you can believe full-out fundamentalist Christian, God gave the Torah to Moses at Sinai, and Jesus was resurrected after 3 days. All of those things are protected here in the United States. And if Project 2025 goes into effect and the Establishment Clause is undone, that will end. That will end. Okay. So that's how I would talk.
I just want to make another comment too. You know, I think we're probably coming across from a progressive theological perspective. I think, yeah. But what I want to say is, in my research into Christian nationalism, I was surprised by the number of evangelical Christians who are also opposed to Christian nationalism. I won't go so far as to say opposed to Project 2025 because I haven't read those quotes. But when I was doing research on Christian nationalism, and yes, there are a minority of evangelicals. Now, I just want to be, I guess there's potentially a lot of people who don't know what an evangelical Christian is, but we're typically talking about more conservative, more fundamental Christians. And there are a minority, but a number of evangelical conservative Christians who are also concerned about the end of the Establishment Clause. And who are, because one, they might lose power and then they'd be out. But the other argument that I read, which they made, and hopefully this is them speaking about their faith, so take it for what it is, but they were arguing that God does not need the power of the state to authorize Jesus's presence in who Jesus was. So their argument was that by using the power of the state to uphold Jesus actually undermines the value of Jesus and the power of God. So interesting perspective that I came across.
I have a question and then a comment. I'm Jorge Paricio Garcia and a recent member of the DEI group here in Barrington. So I just went through a couple of meetings. So I'm happy to be part of this group. My question is, and then a comment. I'll first start with the question. In the Project 2025, do they have a chapter, a long chapter or a short chapter, on what if the elections are lost, they lose the elections? And if January 6th was like a trial for what could happen. And then a comment on Orban. Yeah, he's not many people pay attention to European politics, but it's tricky. I grew up in Europe. Orban recently got a very surprising vote from a Spanish political party, extreme right group called Vox, which in Latin means voice. They gave them the vote so that they would have their own group in the European Parliament. So Orban got even more power. Almost overnight, it was a surprise vote. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So I am not aware of a conversation. A chapter or a text in 2025 that speaks about what happens if they lose. However, it should be noted that the project spends an inordinate amount of time talking about the dismantling of the Justice Department and the FBI. It also spends time speaking about the January 6th domestic terrorists and about making sure that every single one of them is released from jail immediately. And I think that the former President Trump has spoken about that as well. So there is, when you are talking about dismantling the FBI, which they see as a part of the deep state, or releasing January 6th defendants, then it does speak to an approach, anyway, to the rule of law and what should happen. So.
Just adding to that a little bit, my understanding of Project 2025 is that it was written as a blueprint for how they will proceed if/when they win. So its purpose was under the assumption that they would win. If they do not, my reading into it, not through reading it, but through understanding, the goals that were established or clearly laid out in Project 2025 have been the goals that they've been working toward on all levels of government, from local government to state government to federal government, which led to, you were talking about it earlier, the immunity, the presidential immunity. So it has been in process prior to the publication of Project 2025, and will continue to be priorities even if they don't win the election.
Dale, I think that's a really, really important point, because from what I read and from what I understand is this has been written and planned for years and years and years. And you read something like you're talking about the disbanding the Justice Department and so on. They have tons of people in place to do just that if he gets elected. I mean, we have to understand that every one of these things is planned right down to the detail of who's going to run the program in order to execute it.
It is why it's 865 pages. So the other piece of this, it's not just the presidential immunity case, it's also the Chevron case, which just has been overruled this past year on the Supreme Court, which is to Chevron will indeed undo the administrative state as we know it. So it's both of those decisions to give a much greater power in the Chevron case to corporations and lobbyists, and in the presidential immunity case to the presidents. So there's all kinds of things that are happening right now that are putting Project 2025 into place. But the document, as Dale said, was written about what would happen if they should win. That's the point.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
One more question,
and
all right.
then
I'm glad that...
Two more.
Two more questions, all right.
Okay, so my name is Susie Holloway, and when we're talking about Project 2025, it seems like it is like a mushroom that has just sprung up out of nowhere. But as Rabbi Howard has just said, or Altman, sorry, Voss Altman, has said, it actually has been going for a long time. And thinking about the Chevron case is so important because that really is the glue and the oil that makes the machinery of our administrative state work. And that is the deference to agencies to be able to put in reasonable details and rules about how big, broad statutes shall be actually put on the ground and implemented. And it was Justice Gorsuch's mother who worked for President Reagan between 1981 and 1983, and she was one of the first sparks and catalysts of what we are seeing now. And that's how many years? 40 years? Okay. And they were planning it before she got to be head of the EPA, which she loathed, and what she wanted to see it totally destroyed. And we are seeing the crumbling, because even if former President Trump does not win this election, there is obviously a large number of people who work hard for generations in lockstep to have these goals accomplished. So we've seen the destruction of Chevron deference, which is a huge loss to the working of our administrative state without Project 2025, without former President Trump. So we have, I think, a lot of work to do with just making sure that people who are concerned about the destruction of the administrative state and concerned about the taking away of the Establishment Clause, which is freedom of religion and freedom of speech, that they vote. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Susie, thank you so much. Just remember, Project 2025 didn't just come out of the air. It was created by the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank that is well-funded by corporations that want legislation that's friendly to their interests. This is coming out of a very long project of the Heritage Foundation and one of the most dangerous think tanks in the United States, one of now many. Heritage Foundation is probably the oldest of them. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Hi, Joe Scheckman. Susie, that was great. We're way behind. We got a lot of catching up to do, to say the least. But this presentation that the rabbi got from was a fabulous group of women, the Red, White, and Blue Wine Organization.
Red Wine and
Red
Blue.
Wine, thank you,
Yeah.
and Blue Organization. They started really kicking butt. On July 15th, they had 50,000 women who were fighting for the Democrats to challenge, help the Democrats win in these states to beat this right here. So if you don't know about this and to get this, Trinky will get this from you. If you can get this, I can get this to you. And you can get a copy of this, because what they said was 70% of the people out there in the country had no idea what this was about. But when you gave this to them, okay, the majority of them took a look at this, and what do you think they said? No way whatsoever. We need to get this out to everyone. So that's our job. That's what we're trying to do. And if you're interested, get a hold of Trinky. I will make sure she gets a copy of this, because we got a lot of work to do, and we only have 48 days. Let's go. And by the way, congratulations to all of you who showed up and made a difference by taking the step we need to. Thank you for showing up.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to, when
My brain is shutting off. Yeah.
It's a question, not a statement or a speech. What does the 2025 set of proposals say about unions, worker rights, et cetera, et cetera? I've never heard that addressed.
Mark, as the 2025 is sympathetic, shall we say, to corporate interests, the rights of labor unions are certainly at issue. And the freedom of association that is the foundation and bedrock of labor unions comes under attack in Project 2025. So there's no sympathy whatsoever and no identification with the working person, especially in organized labor. And you know that also from the teachers' unions as well that are foundationally attacked, public employee unions, generally speaking.
Remembered what it was I was going to say. So yeah, the brain kicks on every once in a while. What I actually wanted to say is also the challenges in talking about Project 2025 or even Christian nationalism, the mainstreaming of Christian nationalism, is one, you run into the people who are just supportive of it. But I think that one of the big challenges that we face is I think there's a large part of the population, hopefully smaller than there was in 2016, but a large part of the population that would say, oh, this will never happen. This can't happen in America. I have heard that over and over and over again. You know, we have too many checks and balances. We value our freedom. We value religious freedom too much. But what we have seen through the Supreme Court and through legislation on all levels of American government is that it is happening slowly or quickly in some instances, but it is happening and the goals are there. And that's a challenge to also overcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Olstein. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Right now, we've had, not right now, in World War II, we interned Japanese, and they were American citizens. We took their property, we made their lives, we ruined their lives. Now we have a presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate that is ruining lives in Ohio of people who are not citizens. Therefore, that 10 or 11 million that you were speaking of is probably double, triple, because they will not look at the papers.
Oh,
They will not care if you have a green card. They
Yeah.
will not care if you are a refugee. They will not care what your status is. Had to say that. And I think we have to be proud that we're from Rhode Island. Roger Williams left a theologically run government in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Rhode Island did not sign on to the Constitution. The last colony to join in and sign, because they were afraid they would lose that separation of church and state.
Absolutely, and you could not be more right. And I just very, very briefly just note regarding rounding up people to go into camps, just remember that it would have been impossible to even imagine such a thing in 1933. And that right, not just thousands of Jews, but tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Jews simply couldn't believe that it could happen. And yet, the administrative state, established an apparatus to do exactly that. So it can be done, it has been done, and I shudder to think what kind of administrative apparatus could occur when you have nothing but loyalists in agencies that are designed and created to do this very thing. Look, as I said earlier, and to basically to tie this up in a bow, it's not like we haven't been told. This has been published. It is out there for us to read, to digest, to talk about, to discuss. It's now up to us. No one's hiding this from us. It's all out there. And our job as citizens and as concerned and caring patriots who care for the welfare of our nation is to say, we cannot let this happen. And to speak as persuasively as we can about these goals and why these can't happen. So, all right. Thanks so much for coming. There are still snacks there. Really appreciate it. Dale, thank you so much. Trinky, thank you. Joe Scheckman, thank you. Have a great evening, everybody. And don't forget, vote. Make sure that you're signed up to vote. Make sure that your friends will sign up to vote. Vote and vote, vote.